about end of life care. We have heard from him in the beginning few sessions, so I am not introducing him again. Everyone knows him very well. Sir, can we start the session right away?
Hello, everybody. I usually, when I begin, if nobody is smiling, I ask for a smile. But today, practically everybody is wearing a mask. Sister Mercy, thank you for the smile. Very good. It's always nice to start a day with a smile, isn't it? Sri, how many times have you heard me on this subject?
Sir, see, I think for last 7 years now.
You want to go to sleep, I'll wake you up at 3:40.
No, sir. Every time we all learn a lot new things.
Okay. Thank you. With your saying the perfect things, right? Okay, friends. I see, Sri, Raju, is the participation pretty small today? I see that only 22 people have logged in.
Sir, I think everyone will be joining in soon.
Look, many aspects of what I want to talk about, we covered last week when we talked about ethics. To some extent, we went into the ethics of end of life. Only to some extent. There's a lot that is not covered. So let us move on to talking about end of life. Last week, when we talked about ethics, I asked a question. How many of you are able to think about your own death? And I could not get all the responses. I would still have that question hanging in the air. I would expect that about 50% of the audience would say yes, I am able to think about my own death. I think about 1/4 of the audience will say no. And I think the remaining 1/4 will not be quite sure. Well, kind of thing. I am telling you this, that there are two advantages in being able to think about one's own death. For one thing, we will be a bit easier in our minds when we think about diseases, when we think about something that carries a high mortality rate, when we think about COVID-19. So it's partly for our own peace of mind and being able to accept diseases, illnesses, for ourselves, for our family and friends. Secondly, if you are able to cope with the thought, you will also be able to cope with the patient's suffering better. You will be able to help them better, because when you do not know what is going through their mind, it's harder. So that is just by way of introduction. And Raju, I hope you have enabled screen sharing for me as you have. So I'll start with the discussion on end of life care by reminding you of something that we talked last week when we discussed ethics. Can you see the screen?
Yes, sir, we can.
You remember this, that what ICMR has set for your duty and mine. It is not only the doctor's duty for any healthcare provider. The duty is to mitigate suffering. It is to cure sometimes, to relieve often, and to comfort always. Recognizing that we cannot cure all the time. When we cannot cure, what we are doing, what you are doing to your patient with hypertension or diabetes, to help them to live with the disease as well as possible, and to comfort always. And the ICMR adds, there is no exception. This is not for some people and sometime. This is for everybody. This let us have firmly understood in our mind, is our duty as a healthcare provider. If anybody wants to say anything about it, please send a message on chat or raise your hand. Do you have a duty to prolong life at all costs? If your patient has a incurable illness and it is not controllable, if it is advanced cancer with multiple metastases, he is in front of you. Do you have a duty to try to prolong his life by maybe another week? If you put him on artificial life support, if when his uh, nutrition stops, if you put him on initially nasogastric feeding, then total parenteral nutrition maybe. When his BP is falling, if you give inotropes. When his breathing is dropping, you try non-invasive ventilation first, or even invasive ventilation. You can prolong life. The person who died in our ward yesterday could have lived for another 1 or 2 weeks if we had provided these supports. Do we have a duty to do this? Please type up your responses, yes or no, or if you want to say anything more than that, please do.
Sir, Dr. Mercy and Dr. Jacqueline says no.
Okay, we'll wait a little more.
More no's coming in.
I don't know whether Sri was there, but a few years back,
Sir, can you adjust your microphone, sir?
it's also because I am also adjusting my cup of tea in between, sorry. So a few years back, Sri, I don't know if you were in the classroom, I made the participants read out an article written by one journalist by name Sindhu in the newspaper called Hindu. I'll show you a couple of her quotes from her. So she was describing how her father was treated in the ICU. He was begging to be saved from there. His hands and feet were tied up. And Sindhu was saying, but what are you doing it for? Still blood tests were being done. And they were really doing their best to keep him alive. And Sindhu says, my own father, my best friend, was being subjected to this. And she pleaded with them to stop doing this, untie him. And the doctor said, no, we have a duty to keep going. We have a duty to the end to keep fighting. And then after the article was read, I asked all the participants in our classroom, what do you think? Interestingly, like you, the majority of people said that was unnecessary. But the two of the youngest doctors who had just qualified, and both very compassionate human beings, and one of them joined us as a palliative care physician for several months. Those two said, no, as a doctor, we have to fight. Sister Mercy and somebody else said, no, we do not have such a responsibility. But Sister Mercy and myself and Sri and everybody has also to live with the fact that a huge chunk of the medical population, doctors, believe that they have a duty to prolong life at all costs. Though nobody said yes, of the 28 participants who have logged in now, I suspect that there can be some people who may ask, but how can you allow somebody just to die? We have to do something. And I am clarifying this. I have never seen any medical ethics document from the days of Hippocrates down to modern days. I have not come across any dictum, any rule, any law, any ethical code that says you have a duty to prolong life at all costs, even in somebody who is dying a natural death. You do not have that responsibility, but the medical system is confused. In almost every big hospital, dying people are subjected to aggressive end-of-life care and artificial life support. So I am now giving your answer emphatically to this question. The process does cause physical suffering, social suffering, psychological suffering, and spiritual suffering. And the answer is a very clear no. Let us have that clearly understood. Hey, why am I doing all the work? Sri, will you please get one of the participants to read out this sentence?
Yeah, sure. Can anyone read the sentence, the slide? Any
Yeah.
volunteers?
Even on the Maheshwari here.
Maheshwari, this was written by Parthasarathi Shom, a very well-known financial consultant, and he was talking about his mother's last few days. He wrote it in the paper called Business Standard. Yes.
Okay, sir.
Yes, Dr. Maheshwari, please read.
Yes. Even on the day of passing, a specialist recommended a liver function procedure. When asked if it would end the coma, the answer was in the negative.
Please go on.
I further asked why such horrendous measures even at the final stage of life, and was informed it was their responsibility to make available all procedures until the very end, irrespective of other practices elsewhere.
And Parthasarathi Shom was angry. He was angry because his mother had to undergo all that suffering. She had to be alone. She had to be subjected to all those needles going. She had to be subjected to hands and feet tied. And this was totally unethical. So when you come across such a person, why talk about such a person when if I am your patient? There are several things that you will have to start doing, provided you have had the conversations. Remember, if I am the patient, we talked about this last week, right? Hey, Raju, it is to this same group that we talked about ethics last week, right?
No, sir, no.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was getting confused. That was?
That was a different group, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry. I confused you. Look, so then let me go back. I thought it was done. Okay, leave it there. So if I am your patient, one of the things that you have to do for me is to talk to me. Hey, will you tell me that I am dying? Is it acceptable to tell me if I am dying, that I am dying? Please answer the question.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
We
sir.
have to tell you.
Yes, so long as you are doing it with compassion, so long as you are not saying it like a bombshell. Doctor, can you cure me? And you say, no, we cannot cure you and you are dying. That will be cruel. That's not the way to talk. You have had the communication sessions already. You know how to communicate bad news. So long as news is conveyed with compassion to me and to people who love me, my next of kin, people who care for me, they also need to be involved. And then these are some other questions that you will ask. There is no rule that says that in the last few days, the cholesterol medicine still has to be taken. It is very sad that up to the last day, somatostatin is still given. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense. But there will be problems. Your patient may have been seeing the same cardiologist for the last 18 years. They have a relationship. He has started the statin. And often I ring up some people and ask them, may I please stop it? Because if I stop it without their permission, the patient will be upset and the doctor will be upset. But sometimes they are not reachable and I cannot ask them. That's the sad part. And all those needles going in for blood checks, what does it matter on the last 3 days if the sodium is normal or not? Nobody, unless you are dying a sudden death out of a car crash, nobody can die with a normal serum sodium. When your energy level in the cells drop, when your ATP availability in the cells drops, when the sodium potassium pump fails, your sodium will get into the cells. Sodium pump fails and sodium becomes intravascular. Therefore, serum sodium drops. That's part of the dying process. You cannot and should not infuse hypertonic saline to every dying person. Blood checks do not matter. Maybe till the last day, your blood sugar may have relevance, but your serum creatinine would not be relevant once you are clear. It's clear that you are dying. Secondly, even in this group, I would take a guess that most of your patients who die with you die with an intravenous line. An intravenous line causes suffering. Towards the end of life, when your body's immunity is low, you get thrombophlebitis easily and the limbs become painful. Veins will be hard to get. If it is a patient with cancer after chemotherapy, their veins may not be visible. Most of the time, except very rarely, you do not need an intravenous line. Whenever we put in an intravenous line, except with some exceptions, we are putting it for our convenience to shoot in some medicine or other. Most medicines that you need towards the end of life, like opioids, like haloperidol, like metoclopramide, and many others, can be given subcutaneously or rectally. These are comfortable routes without causing too much of suffering. So these are some of the things that we'll remember. Stopping unnecessary medicines and procedures and being as non-invasive as possible. Does this group include nurses?
No,
Raju?
sir. No, sir.
No.
No, sir.
Anyway, that doesn't matter. Generally, okay. Are our new nurses joining this class? No.
No, sir.
Okay. When new nurses have recently joined, if I ring up in the evening and ask, hey, how is so-and-so, this patient? Somebody new will be saying, his blood pressure is on 20/90, his pulse rate is 84, temperature is 37.3 degrees, and that will be what they say. Does that really matter in some when I am dying? But if it is somebody who has been with us for about a month, if I ring up in the evening and ask about a dying patient, hey, how is so-and-so? They will say, he was a little restless earlier, but now he is comfortable. He was given haloperidol, he is comfortable. He has had his last dose of morphine when he started complaining of pain. His family had come, they are with him now. and he seems to be okay. The nurse would say he is okay about a dying patient. What she means, under the circumstances, it is as okay as possible. So how is he or how is she becomes so much more important than what is the BP. If the person is unconscious, will you change position every 2 hours? Even on the last 2 days, a pressure sore will be a problem. It will cause pain, it will cause suffering. We don't want that. But rather than go by every 2 hours, if you find that the person is sleeping after 2 hours, soundly sleeping and he didn't sleep last night, you will allow him to sleep for another hour or two. So maybe there will be a balance. It will be so much easier to put him on a pressure relieving mattress like an airbed, so that you don't have to move every 2 hours, maybe 3 hours or 4 hours may be fine. One of the things that I would very much like to happen with everybody that I am working with is that even to the apparently unconscious person, you keep communicating. Because I remember that somebody who is apparently unconscious, we do not know whether he is able to hear anything. We do not know whether he is able to feel something. We only know that he cannot open his eyes and he seems to be unconscious. And it gladdens my heart when our nurses go to somebody who is apparently unconscious and says, "Uncle, we are going to move you. We are going to turn you to the other side." I'm happy to hear that because I know that some people can hear. One of my friends has told me this. He had a stroke. This was some 20 years back. He was unconscious for about 3 months. Well, no, not unconscious. He was unconscious for several days. He could not speak for 3 months. He could not express anything for 3 months. Nobody thought of giving him a pen and a pad, and he didn't think of asking for it either. Unless you think about it, it will not happen. And he says the worst thing of those 3 months was he did not know what was happening to him. Nobody told him, including his wife and children, told him he had a stroke. Nobody told him that he has a chance of recovery. And this, let me remind you, if a bit of your human love can go to that person, let it go through your voice and your touch. And something that very often we forget. Raju and Sri, I don't know if at any point of time this business of bystanders was brought up.
Sir, your microphone was lowered, but you were asking about whether we have brought out the word bystander.
Yes.
Yeah. No, sir. Not.
In Palim, India, we do not have bystanders for patients. We encourage family members. They are family members, not bystanders. Bystanders and impersonally. When I am your patient, I want to be Rajagopal. And my family should be recognized as my family members by name if you can remember them. If not, as is common in our custom, call them uncle, aunt, or whatever you say, ben or bai, whatever. So recognize them. By definition, palliative care is for the patient and the family. They are suffering. They need you. And when the person is dying, we are all used in our hospitals to shoving them away so that you can stand there and jump on the chest and do this. Instead of that, take a step back. Let the family be with them. Allow that touch. Allow that crying together if that is necessary. Allow that final kiss on the cheek. That's important. And dear doctors, please remember children, children of families. They often are the worst sufferers. They suffer because nobody tells them anything. If they ask questions, they are discouraged. And the child may go and ask the dad, Dad, is mom dying? And children often hear this, you see. I mean, in the school, his friends have heard their parents talking, hey, so and so is dying. And he has heard that. He has that burning question in him. He comes and asks, Dad, is mom dying? The dad gets furious. How do you dare talk about inauspicious things like this? Never talk like that. And the child will never talk. Even if they don't get angry, people will discourage questions. And when children ask and you evade questions, they get the message. They get the message that this is not a popular question. I shouldn't ask that. They have the burning questions in them. Raju, I'll send you an article written by a friend of mine. She came to us many years back. I think she was some 20 or 22 by that time. And she was a student. And she wrote that article about dealing with her mother's death. I'll share that with you. I'll email you that article. Raju, please remember. And we'll, when you read that, you will realize the importance of talking to children. But we cannot talk to the children without the permission of the parents. So what I do is I tell the other parent, look, children very often have burning questions in them. And if you don't address their fears, they get behavioral disorders. They will misbehave in school. And the parent may say, it's already happening, doctor. I got a call from his class teacher. He was always a nice boy so far. And last week he hurt somebody else with a sharp pencil. So usually they will give you the permission and we sit down and talk to the children truthfully. How are we doing for time? Oh, half an hour up. It's very important to facilitate religious rites. It cannot be underemphasized. Sri, in one of the hospitals that we were, now we have a standalone place. You know that earlier we were working not in Arubana, in a private hospital.
Yes.
And I had this experience once. I was called in at the middle of the night because of a patient was dying who was personally close to me. And earlier she had asked for me, now she was unconscious, but I went. When I went there was a nursing supervisor outside the door blocking the priest who had been called in to receive Holy Communion. The patient was under treatment by the neurologist, had been moved to an ICU. The priest who had been called, the supervisor was preventing the Holy Communion, which was very important for the patient and family. And that's as cruel as the face of medicine can be. But, religious rights, facilitating religious rights is important. But I'll also tell you one negative. This was told to me by a priest. He was telling me the story of an 18-year-old girl with leukemia. She had ALL, was undergoing chemotherapy. In between got leukopenia, got infection, septicemia, was under treatment. And the family panicked and got in a priest. And when he went there and gave Holy Communion, that was the first time it was communicated to the girl that she may be dying. Well, the story is that she went through the treatment. She survived. After a year and a half, she survived. After 5 years, she was declared cured. She says, in the whole of my illness, the worst experience was that Holy Communion. Not because of the Holy Communion, because in a brutal way, she was given the information that you are dying. So remember that everything has two sides. I strongly believe that we doctors have the duty not only to poke the needles and to give the medicines, but to consider the person as a whole. And if a religious rite is important for the person, we should facilitate it with the proper preparation. Does anybody have any comment? Maheshwari did the reading last time. It's not fair to keep bothering Maheshwari all the time. Would somebody else read this piece from the Hindu in 2016? It was written by a journalist called Sindhu.
My 84-year-old father, my best friend, was enduring raw, intrusive medical procedures against his own wish. All skin and bones, he looked defenseless and at the mercy of doctors, his arms tied up, vulnerable and agonized. But I didn't want to infuriate the doctors in whose hands we had surrendered his body and who had broken down his body into isolated segments only they could put back together again, if at all.
What do you think? Who read this?
Dr. Rose.
Dr. Rose, thank you very much. Dr. Rose and others, what does Sindhu mean by saying that the doctors had broken down her father's body into isolated segments, only they could put back together? I'll tell you what she means. I mean, she had actually subsequently, I had written to her, and Sri, I don't know if you remember, she had come and stayed with us for 4 days, had joined me on home visits from Mumbai. So what she meant was, a nephrologist will come in, look at the chemistry.
Sir, your mic, sir.
Sorry, nephrologist would come in, order some medicines and order some procedures. The cardiologist would come in and do something else. There was no coordination. His body was being handled by several individual departments, independent of each. That's what she means. So this is the horror that I certainly do not want to happen to me. When my time comes, thank you, doctors. I need your help. If you can cure me, cure me. If you cannot cure me, treat me to live with the disease, provided I can have some reasonable quality of life, and so that I can finish my unfinished business. But when it is time for me to go, I want to go with some comfort, some dignity. These are both patients whom I treated. This woman was poor. ശ്രീ നമ്മുടെ കൊളത്തൂരുള്ള ഹോസ്പേസിൽ കിടന്നവരാ. She had nothing. The daughter could not keep her and had taken her to the poor home. But the last week of life, the daughter came. She at least had a few drops of water going down her throat. We could give her morphine for pain for the last 7 months of her life. And I believe she went with dignity. Whereas the other was a patient who was taken away from us by loving children because they could not bear to see the dad die. They patient died in an ICU. Very uncomfortable, cruel death. You can see that his arms are tied. Sorry, 28 people here. I'm sorry to give you bad news, but all of you will die someday. When you do, you have to think which of these you would like. And if you do not want that man's kind of death, then we do not have a moral right to inflict it on the patient. Dr. Rose, would you read this out for me? Or anybody else?
Dr. Rose, can you unmute from your end? We are not able to hear you.
Futile and inappropriate artificial life support measures usually cause physical, psychological, and social suffering to the patients and the families. Palliative care is the human alternative.
Humane.
Main alternative.
Dr. Rose, where do you work?
No, sir, I am Dr. Kavita, gynecologist.
Okay, Dr. Kavita. Sorry. Dr. Kavita, what do you think about this sentence, the first sentence? What's your opinion?
When you are giving artificial support to the patient, that is causing some physical, psychological, and social suffering to the patients and families.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
So allow the patient to be
You know, do you agree with this, that it
Yes.
causes suffering?
Yes.
No, Dr. Kavita, I agree that sometimes you are not sure. Sometimes you are not sure whether the person is dying or not. You think that may be salvageable, like that 18-year-old girl with leukemia. So sometimes you may have to keep on giving artificial life support measures, hoping that the person will survive. But when medically it is reasonably certain that there is unlikely to be a comeback, we should not be providing futile and inappropriate artificial life support measures, and instead we shall be providing them only palliative care. Thank you, Dr. Kavita, for reading. Dr. Kavita, will you read out the definition of euthanasia also? This is the official definition. In India, we do not have a definition that is law. This is from the ICMR. This document is available for free download.
Euthanasia is the international act of
No, not international.
Intentional, sorry. Intentional act of killing a terminally ill patient.
Wait. The word is deliberately used. Euthanasia is killing. All with good intention, but it is still killing. Okay, continue.
A terminally ill patient on voluntary request by the direct intervention of a doctor for the purpose of the good of the patient.
However good the intervention is, the intention is, euthanasia is killing.
On
request. But if we are allowing somebody to die a natural death, would that be euthanasia?
No.
So that is one thing that every participant of this discussion must have clearly imprinted on the mind. Allowing natural death is not euthanasia. Euthanasia is intentional killing, however noble the intention. So let us have this very clearly understood. Will you continue with this?
The term passive euthanasia is an obsolete terminology.
Obsolete
terminology, and should be avoided as euthanasia cannot be passive.
Wait. We earlier in the last slide said that euthanasia is the intentional act of killing. That cannot be passive. Okay, and continue.
and withholding or withdrawing a potentially inappropriate treatment in a patient dying with a terminal illness that early prolongs the dying process cannot be construed as an intention to kill.
Okay, that's a long, complicated sentence, again from the ICMR. But what it says is, if I allow somebody to die a natural death by not using a ventilator, or even by switching off the ventilator, it is still a natural death. The person was dying anyway. So the using the term passive euthanasia for withholding or withdrawing an artificial life support should not be called passive euthanasia. Unfortunately, this was on 12 March, 3 days prior to this, on 9 March 2018. There was a Supreme Court judgment which was totally confusing, and they used the term passive euthanasia for withdrawal of life support. So all of you please understand, this is we don't have a law covering this. So this is the official medical definition for our country. So if somebody is on artificial life support, I should be asking these questions. Has the person written an advance directive? That's what we call a living will. Ladies and gentlemen, for your information, I have written an advance directive. Shri Chandrika has it. So please ask her. And I have made it clear there that if I have an incurable disease, I do not want to be subjected to artificial life support. I may not have said, written it down, but if you know that this is my intention, that has to be taken into consideration. But even if I have left nothing, I wouldn't go only by Sridevi's opinion. Hey, this is the question of my life. Sridevi, I would like you to get a couple of colleagues. Well, according to ICMR, it is 3. In many countries, it is 2. Independent physicians perform an evaluation and opine that restoration of reasonable quality of life is not possible. Listen to the family and answer their. We have to be on the same side. There is confusion if they are saying something else. And the conflict arises usually when you bring up the matter only in the last minute. These conversations have to start early. Making the family sit down, asking, what do you understand about the illness? Do you have any questions? What do you think is happening to him? What do you think is the chance of his recovery? And if you have had those discussions, it's more likely that we'll be on the same side. And never say, offer things that are not available. If you say, okay, if we were in USA, such and such treatment would have been available, my family is going to be worried. Okay, only my son would be thinking, only if because I am not rich enough. If I were rich enough, I could have taken my dad to USA. So that's cruel. Realistic treatment options are to be given. Patient and family needs time to take decisions. And sometimes I may say, okay, doctor, I'll accept non-invasive ventilation, but I don't want an endotracheal tube. If I am deciding that, you had better go by that. And never bring up the cost at this time. Don't say, I don't want to put him on a ventilator, it will cause him a lot of trouble. And moreover, it will also cost 30,000 rupees a day. If you say that, the family is now being blackmailed, emotionally blackmailed and saying, cost doesn't matter, do anything. So this is not the time for that. And very, very important, never ever say there is nothing more to be done. That is not true. There is no situation where there's nothing more can be done. We will instead say, we will continue to do everything that is necessary. we will continue to do everything to keep him comfortable. That should be our message. Because when we say there's nothing to be done, if these doctors are not able to do anything, let us take him somewhere else, will be the thought that comes up in the family. I will repeat that for everybody, anybody who has gone to sleep in the meantime, please wake up. Never ever say there is nothing more to be done. And for everyone participating who is able to think about your own death, I would recommend that you do what I have done. Write down what you want. If it is generally good to get patients to do it, if you can. According to the Supreme Court judgment, if I have written my advance directive, you have the ethical and legal duty to respect my wishes. Currently, according to the Supreme Court judgment, there is confusion because my advance directive has to be countersigned by the judicial magistrate first class. I'm not going to the court and wait for hours to get him to sign it. Then one 3-member medical board in the hospital is not enough. You have to connect that to the district collector. A second medical board with DMO as chairman has to be appointed. And the first class magistrate will have to come and see me in the ICU before he will say, okay, go ahead, stop the ventilator. This is all impossible to be done. So there are problems with the Supreme Court judgment that they have put in. Though theoretically they have accepted withholding and withdrawing of life support, they have put in an impractical procedure to make it happen. But we bring it up at all. All these legal issues need to come in only when there is a conflict of opinion. If me, the patient, my family, and you, the doctor, are on the same page, there is no question. There is nobody going to talk about ventilator when I am dying of advanced cancer. So this is the crux of it. Primarily, we remember that our duty of care is only to cure sometimes, but to relieve often and to comfort always. When there is a conflict of opinion between me and the family, or between you and the family, or between two factions in the family, I agree that there will be problems. But in the majority, we can all travel together. And I'll close with this. For the dying person, these are most important. Physical comfort is important. Finding out what is most important to the person is important. In the last week of life, doctors, if you have a few, not only in the, when I have an incurable illness, if you can find half an hour to spend with me, if not, it's your nurse or your social worker, please sit down with me. Find out about me, the human being. For those who can find the time to do this, for a few patients, I strongly urge you to do this. Sit down with the person and say, tell me the story of your life. Where were you born? And who else was there? Allow me to tell my story. Then you will find what is important. I may say, the one thing that I wanted to do was to go to Velankanni once more, to pray to the Lord. And somehow, if it's feasible, we have to facilitate that. And many people will say, doctor, please, I want to go home. I want to die at home. That connectedness, whether it's to God or to religion or the environment or the home, that's important. And that connection has to be restored. Think again before taking your elderly parents to live with you in the apartment in Mumbai, because you are worried about her staying in the village alone. Maybe you will be making a big mistake, imprisoning her in your 7th story apartment. Remember that people need companionship. Conversations may be necessary. and find out what is most important for me in my life. And if you mean to say that I'll never be able to see my daughter married, and in that case, I'll be sad. You have to be truthful to me. But maybe you too, you with me, will work out that relationship so that I'll be able to leave a video message for my daughter to see with her bridegroom on the wedding day. Find out what is meaningful for the person, facilitate that. And remember, doctors are generally afraid of using the word love. Love is not measurable. You cannot do a serum love examination. But remember, this great physician, how many centuries back, 5 centuries back, said this: most fundamental principle of medicine is love. Thank you very much for listening to me patiently.
Thank you so much, sir, so much for the session. We can take up a few questions. We have a few minutes before the presentation. Either you can unmute yourself and ask, or you can type it in the chat.
Sir,
Yes.
Yes.
sir, you told that we should talk to the patient about his death, no? Directly to the patient when patient is in ICU. I am scared to use the word death even to talk to him, to talk to the patients.
Punita, let me clarify. It may have to be spoken in the ICU, but ICU is not the best person to talk to about this. It has to happen early. Punita, maybe I'll also point out, most people are afraid to talk about death. The word death, that's in this generation. 2 generations back, that was not the kind of thing we taught. Death was the inevitable consequence of life. We all recognize that. Now death is a stranger. I know it's difficult. So the conversation, as I see it, will go like this. Not when the person is gasping like this, and then you can go and that's no time to talk about this. So in that conversation that you are having with me for half an hour or 15 minutes, you ask me, Uncle, what do you think is happening to you? What do you understand about the illness? And I may say, daughter, I know my time is up. Or I may not know this. Daughter, tell me frankly, can I get cured? And you may know that I cannot be cured. You will not say no immediately. That will be too blunt. Instead say, so that means you were hopeful of getting a cure? I may say, yes, I was certainly hoping. I have many things to do. And you may say, I certainly hope you can get cured, but let me ask you, have you considered the possibility that you may not get cured? And the person says, I hope that is not true. And you say, why did you want? Why did you want not to think about it? And I would say, my daughter was to get married in December. I wanted to live to see the marriage. And you may actually help me. Well, let us hope it happens. But the way the disease is progressing, I fear that it may not be possible. Is there some way of bringing your daughter's wedding forward? You may actually find solutions. The word death very often will be brought up by me. And if I bring it up, never lose the chance of picking it up. I may not do it again. I may say, sometimes Dr. Punita, sometimes I think I may be dying. And you ask, has that thought of death, Punita, don't be scared of using that word at that point, at least when I am bringing it up. So the thought of death came to you. And I would say, yes, it is often in my mind. At night, I can't sleep because I am seeing death before me. And that may open up my fears. You may ask, what is it about death that you are fearing? Is it just not being there, or is it about any suffering during dying? This, once you address it, the results are very, very good usually. But also, if I am not prepared to think about it even, that's a risky thing. Just to go and ask, have you been thinking about death? That may be too abrupt. It has to be brought in as a part of the conversation about diagnosis, prognosis, and prognosis will lead us to that.
Thank you. Sir, and you were telling about the legal aspects of discontinuing life support, no, sir?
Mm.
But routinely, there are many patients in our ICU who will want to go home,
Mm.
maybe just because they cannot afford or they understood the futility of the treatment. So, in that case, are we doing something legally wrong to send the patient who is on life support, like ventilator? We extubate, put them on mask, and send them. We go till the ambulance with an ambu bag and send them home.
Punita, as I said earlier, if you, the patient, and the family are all agreed, that's the right medical course to pursue. The legal aspect doesn't come in there. The legal aspect comes in if the daughter from Dubai appears on that day and starts creating a problem. So it's important for us to make sure that the family is on the same page about this.
Okay, okay, sir.
Sir, I would like to add on to that point where Dr. Punita was telling extubating and being there till the ambulance and then leaving. So I would recommend to start to incorporate palliative care so that the transition is really smooth and help them to cope with the things rather than just sending them away.
Punita,
Just my thought.
Punita,
Sir.
absolutely. Sridevi, what Sridevi said is so important because when you take the ventilator off, the patient is likely to be very breathless.
Yeah.
The patient needs help there. This thing of all of a sudden taking the tube out, rushing him into the ambulance and sending him is not the ideal thing at all. This process should have been gradual, and that person needs low dose morphine to take care of the breathlessness. Sri, my answer was very incomplete. Thank you for filling in.
Okay. Sir, so we can give morphine and till they reach home, we can make somebody ambu them and reach home.
That is a rather cruel thing to do, Punita. I'll tell you why. I know you mean well, but somebody, who is that somebody? The wife, the son, the brother, and they squeeze it. What experience have they had in doing it? And after 2 kilometers, the person dies. I know this is routinely done.
Yeah,
You
we
give
are
a
doing
handbag,
that.
you give an ambu bag to the family and send them away, and quietly say, when you no longer need it, please bring the ambu bag back. That's what actually happens. And the brother will forever wonder, oh my God, did I do something wrong? Was it because of me that my brother died? And imagine a spouse having to do that. It's horrible. I think, as Sri suggested, this person should be on morphine, low dose morphine, breathlessness treated, and sent without that ambu bag. And just keeping that ambu bag is usually not very useful and very traumatizing.
Okay.
Where do you work, Punita?
Sir, I work in a cardiac ICU, sir.
Okay.
CPS. Post-surgical ICU. Sir.
Okay.
in Vaidehi Medical College, sir. In
Oh, right,
Bangalore.
right. Okay.
So there'll be a lot of patients who cannot afford, they'll want to take the patient back sometimes. And in cardiology, after attending the course, I have talked about incorporating palliative care.
Oh, and you're still alive. Okay.
Sir, actually in our college, there is nobody in the palliative department. The person who was there left and there's nobody in the department.
There was a palliative care unit.
It was there, it seems, sir. So,
Okay. Sri Devi and Raju, we are going to work with Punita to going to help her to re-establish that palliative care center.
so
Very good. Sorry, I think I have exceeded time. Raju
Can
must be getting
start the
quite
case
annoyed with me.
presentation. We can move on to the case presentation now.
Dr. Saral?
Hear me, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you. You can start your presentation, ma'am.
Yes.
Dr. Saral, can you make yourself visible or is the connection too poor?
Actually, I muted, sir. I do not know why my video is not coming.
Okay. Right. Okay.
Respected
There
sir.
you are. There you are. We can see you now. Very good.
Thank you, sir.
Jolly good. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Respected sir, respected madams, and my dear colleagues, good evening to you all. I am Sister Dr. Saral, working in Tamil Nadu as medical officer. So can I start presenting, sir? Present patient details: age 88-year-old female with diagnosis left posterior thigh compartment soft tissue tumor, atypical lipomatous tumor, known case of diabetic mellitus. Presenting complaints: history of swelling in left posterior thigh for 30 days. History of illness: patient was apparently well since 30 days back when she noticed a big oval-shaped swelling over the posterior aspect of the left thigh. The swelling was not associated with pain, no history of difficulty in walking, no history of trauma, no history of injections given, no history of fever. She went to hospital, the investigations done, advised surgery. But patient does not want surgery due to post-operative complications as she is aged, as well as due to the season of COVID-19. But the family members are in terrible distress and dilemma on decision making whether to go for surgery or not, since the investigations MRI shows the mass is extending into the muscle layer and engaging the sciatic nerve. She is a known case of diabetic since 20 years. Since then, she is under regular medication. On examination, she is conscious oriented, afebrile, pulse rate 104 per minute, BP 130 by 90 mm mercury, SpO2 96%, and weight 43 kg. No pallor, no icterus, no significant lymphadenopathy. Chest clear, CVS normal, abdomen soft, CNS normal. On local examination, on left thigh, an oval-shaped swelling measuring around 10 into 8 centimeter in size, deep to subcutaneous plane, cystic in consistency, non-tender, no local rise in temperature, no distal neurovascular deficits. Next slide, please. Treatment and significant investigations. Fasting blood sugar 112 milligram per deciliter, PPS 154 milligram per deciliter, serum urea 50 milligram per deciliter, serum creatine 0.7 milligram per deciliter, and according to USG in the left thigh region done, and it shows the lesion in the posterior aspect of the left thigh extending into the muscle layer. Features suggestive of fibromyolipoma, intramuscular lipoma. And MRI of left thigh with contrast done, likely intramuscular lipoma in the posterior compartment of left thigh, encasing the sciatic nerve, and the mass is compressing on the vastus medialis and rectus femoris muscle. Histopath report: atypical lipomatous tumor, left thigh advised wide excision biopsy for confirmatory diagnosis. Psychosocial aspects. She lives alone as she enjoys to be alone. Her husband died 11 years back and has 2 sons and a daughter. Her first son is a Catholic priest, 65 years old. Her daughter got married and well settled, 63 years old. Her second son, well educated, a bank manager, 60 years old. She is loved and cared very much by all her 3 children and her relatives. Though her son and daughter love to keep her mother with them, still she likes to stay alone. She eats well, sleeps well, and she is regular in taking her daily medication. She is a devoted Catholic. Every day, early morning at 6 o'clock, walks around 1 kilometer and goes to the church. No financial problem in the family. She herself cooks. She carries on daily works. Helpers are there to helps only in keeping house clean and sometimes to buy things, etc. Her younger son lives 300 kilometers away from her in another state, and the daughter, elder son, in the same state, 150 kilometers away, and the children daily communicates through phone calls and emails to her. She is anxious and worried about the lesions in left thigh and personally does not want surgery, and at the same time, she likes to listen to the doctor's advice. The family consulted 3 surgeons and 2 anesthetists regarding on her surgery, finally confused and in dilemma whether to go for it or not, as they had 2 different opinions from 2 surgeons who are for surgery and the third one is not for it. Her children are ready to do anything that's good for her mother, and they are well educated and they are willing to spend any amount of money for her. Medications. She's on regular injection, insulin, human mixed-start, 30/70, 10 units in the morning, tablet Telecriptin, 20 milligram, 1 in the morning, and tablet Nurofen both 1 in the night. Main concern, anxious, fear and worry about post-operative complication, confusion, terrible distress. Summary. 88 years old and elderly female, known case of diabetic mellitus, diagnosed to have left posterior thigh compartment soft tissue tumor, atypical hypomatous tumor, plan, wide local excision. Discussion points. What's the right approach? Whether to go for surgery or not at this old age? Can she tolerate anesthetic and post-operative complications at this old age? If at all for surgery, is it advisable at this peak time of COVID-19 season? What type of advice this patient and family is in need? How to make her comfortable at this old age? Is it necessary to go for surgery when she gets some symptoms like pain and unable to walk? Thank you, sir. Thank you, madams.
Thank you so much, Sister Saril, for the elaborate presentation. You have gone into very in detail, like you know who all are there in the family, what all things were discussed, and what does she think about the treatment. Everything well in detail, and that is very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Would you like to start with sharing what did you think when this came up to you? What did you plan to do, or what could you do?
Yeah, ma'am.
Share your experience. What could you?
Actually, like this for me, the first experience, ma'am. And I did not see the patient, only over the phone I talked to her. But their children came to me, and they are I see in them real love for the mother, and really they want to do something which is really good, and they are ready to spend any amount of money also. and they listen. Their mother actually personally does not want surgery. So I said, since your mother is not willing for surgery and she is also still right now 88 and all, and nicely doing all kind of works, moving around, and she's very happy. And now also in the time of COVID-19 is the peak here in Tamil Nadu mainly. And it is my advice is that let her go like that. And since she's so happy, she's also personally does not want. I am not for surgery, and still I contact my doctors, and then I will also let you know that I talk.
Anyone else would like to share your thoughts about this patient? Whether how to go about it?
We can counsel the patient to undergo surgery and discuss with the patient. Can counsel her.
Thank you, ma'am. So you want to tell the patient how important it is to go for the surgery. Anyone else before we ask?
I feel, I think if this
Yes,
is not
Manish.
going to, if this is not going to cause any complication, and even the primary first, I can say important VIP here is the patient. When she is not willing for surgery, I think better we can go with her choice. And if there is really no complications going to happen, let her be happy. So that's what I feel.
Sharing your thought. Anyone else? Any difference of opinion, or what would you like to?
I would like to give my opinion, ma'am. I am Dr. Anita.
Yeah, sure.
I'm a surgeon. So in view of the tumor, and most likely it is benign, and pressing on the sciatic nerve, she might develop symptoms in the future. And surgery needs to be under spinal anesthesia only. We did not go for GA, did not work out for GA pre-op investigations. I feel that we can take little risk of getting her operated, ma'am.
Thank you,
will
ma'am.
give her more comfort in the future, psychologically as well as symptomatically.
Thank you for your suggestion. Any other hands, Raju? Can you see someone who wants to speak, or we can ask sir?
No, ma'am, no hands are coming up.
Sir, along with the discussion point, I would like to ask, is age a factor in deciding the treatment? What if she was a 30-year-old female? Would the decision be the same, or just out of curiosity? Over to you, sir.
Shri,
Yes, sir.
between a 30-year-old person and an 88-year-old person, whose decision is going to be? Who is to decide? Whether it's 30 or 88, chodo baat. Does that make a difference? Who will decide?
Patient should decide.
It is the patient's decision, isn't it? Dr. Lilitha, Dr. Kavitha, everybody. Dr. Lilitha's opinion is important. For me, the first step is to have the facts clear. What is the likelihood? I mean, certainly, as Dr. Lilitha says, the position appears very dangerous in the sense she could be in absolute agony. And all of us know that a neuropathic pain is so much harder to treat than a nociceptive pain. So she could be in agony. She could lose use of the limb. On the other hand, I don't know if it's pressing on a vessel. Will she go into major bleeding? This I don't know. If I know that factually things are correct, what I want to do, Dr. Saral.
Yes, sir.
I would like you to sit down with the patient.
Yes, sir.
And this business of standing and talking down at the patient will not be enough for this conversation. Sit down, relax, talk,
Yes.
take the tone of a friend, a younger sister talking to her. If she seems willing, hold her hand or touch her hand and say, Akka, I am told that you are very worried about the operation. You are also worried about your illness. What exactly are you worried about? What exactly are you afraid of? She has fear. Okay, we all know she is afraid of surgery. What exactly is she afraid of? She will say, I don't want to be a burden on my children. If you operate and I get paralyzed, this is my fear. Or she may say, well, I'm afraid of the pain. You operate and I'll be in agonizing pain. I remember how much my sister suffered when she had that other surgery. We make assumptions. We should not. We make sometimes assumptions that people are not sensible. People are generally, most people are sensible. We need to sit down with her. Dr. Saril, you have not seen her. Somebody needs to sit down with her and find out what her fears are. This is an exceptional family with a lot of love between them. Once we find out, okay, I was trying to put myself in that person's shoes. All of you are too far away from her age. I am closer to her age than any of you. So Sridevi she asked a very pertinent question. She knows the answer. She only wanted to raise the issue. Okay, leave alone 88. If it was 96, would you deny me surgery only because I'm 96? I see this often happening. Somebody gets a fracture for the femur. And 96, what's the point? You leave him alone and he dies the most horrendous death with 7 different pressure sores all over the body in agony for the rest of his life. This, so long as I am competent to take a decision, it is my decision. I may tell you, Dr. Saril, my problem is I don't want to be dependent. I want to be able to look after myself. And Dr. Saril may then be able to say, actually, Akka, if we do not operate, this may cause more problem for you. You may not be able to walk and you may be in pain. And Dr. Saril asks yourself a question. Sorry, who was the surgeon? Dr. Kavita? No, I forgotten. You are the surgeon, Dr. Saril?
No, sir.
Dr.
Huh?
Lalita.
Dr. Lalita.
Dr. Lalita. So, okay, Dr. Lalita will be able to make the assessment, putting everything together, how much the risk it is. And you need to give me the truth. So, yes, unfortunately, there's a risk involved in the surgery. But the risk of not operating the surgery is so much more. The chance of paralysis is so much more. Be honest with me. Help me and my family to take a decision. I need the autonomy. Even at 88 or 96, it is still my life. Unless I am confused and delirious, I will take the decision. With the help of my children, I may say I can't decide. Ask my daughter. That's fine. Then I am giving him my autonomy and the daughter will take the decision. But very often, we fail in finding out what exactly is the cause of the fear. I have a feeling, like Dr. Lalita, that this lady desperately needs the surgery or she is going to have a miserable, miserable future. She may have complications, may even die. I accept that. But she seems to have a reasonably good chance of walking again. And I would love it if she gets her morning 1 kilometer walk again. That's my objective, her quality of life. Not only the risk of complications.
Anyone else to agree or disagree or sharing your thoughts about it?
Sir, it is okay, sir. I am working as a gynecologist. I see many patients more than 80 years with massive prolapse, procedentia, vaginal discharge. Some patients, their children doesn't want to take her for operation. They say mother is very old. We don't want to do any surgery for her. That will affect your life. But I am of the opinion that this massive vaginal procedentia should be corrected. With the procedentia, the patient is having a miserable life. So we are taking all the patients more than 80 to 90. Most of the patients are coming by the age of 80 to 90 with massive vagina prolapse for surgery.
Dr. Kavita, you are a busy gynecologist, may not be able to find the time. But if you have the time, what I would do is to sit down with that family. The problem is all of them may not be there. One will be in Ahmedabad and one will be in Chicago. That's a problem, I know. Maybe whoever is available, sit down with them. They love their mother and they don't want her to have any risk. So they say no operation. But tell them, without surgery, her life will be such and such and such. And when they understand this blind love will give way for sensible love. So then the daughter may say, but how about if suppose something happens? And you may then bring up the issue. You mean, suppose there are complications and she even dies? Is that what you mean? I think considering everything, she has an excellent chance of coming around. But the possibility of something going wrong at that age cannot be avoided. But it will be, and eventually, Dr. Kavita may say one thing. Betty, if it was my sister, I would advise her to have go ahead and surgery. If it was myself in that position, I would want surgery. And then you will have to leave it to her and the children. And we will not always succeed, of course.
Okay, sir.
One of the questions is, at this peak time of COVID-19 season, is it advisable to do this? It will be difficult to do this now, I know. But I will go to Dr. Lalitha and ask her, what do you think, doctor? Can we wait for about, okay, when will all this be over? All this need not be over. The worst may be over in 3 months. I don't know. Is it okay to wait for several months? And Dr. Lalitha may say, okay, wait. Or she may say, well, if she starts getting sciatic pain, you must immediately operate. I'll go by that advice. I need the surgeon's opinion in this case.
Yes,
Any
I agree
last
with you.
thoughts?
One of the problems is between the anesthetist and the surgeon, you will be explaining the risks. You will be telling her, okay, she is 88, she has atherosclerosis, she has diabetes, there is a risk of surgery. And the loving family may say, then I don't want my father to have surgery. So just giving that risk alone is not enough. You will also have to explain the risk of not having the surgery. And that's where what I said about paternalistic autonomy comes in the sense, but really, if I were in her position, I would want the surgery. That will be the best.
I would like to second the thoughts sir was sharing. It's really important to ask what are the fears for undergoing surgery. As sir was mentioning, it must be something. Usually, patients say, "I have seen another patient taking chemotherapy and died after second cycle," and it may not be even the same diagnosis, and they are scared to undergo chemotherapy. So the fears have to be explored. Why they don't want to go for the treatment. Sitting and talking is really important to explore those fears.
You can stop screen sharing now, so it will be better to see everybody, right, Raju?
Raju?
Yeah.
That was excellent interaction from 3 or 4 people. Thank you very much.
Sir, can you adjust your mic? We can't hear you.
Sorry. That was excellent interaction from 3 or 4 people. Raju, there are a couple of people sitting behind you. Do you think Sangeeta or who else is sitting behind you? Yeah.
Dr. Anand is also there, sir.
Dr. Anandan, would any of you have any questions to ask, or anybody in the audience except for those who have spoken, somebody else? There must be a lot of questions that people are hesitant to ask. If you don't want to ask, send it by chat. We have 4 minutes more.
Yeah. Any last comments or anything to share or discuss before we wind up today's session? No, sir, there are no chats coming in.
Okay. We'll give a gift of 3 minutes to everybody.
Yes.
So they can fill up the feedback now, right?
Yes, sir, they can.
Sri, will you allow me to leave if the discussion is over?
Yes, sir. Sure. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Raju.
Thank you, sir.
So before leaving, you can all give in your feedback. The link is sent in the chat session. So we can see next week with that's the last session, right, Raju?
Yes,
Next
sir.
week
Yes.
session.
Yes, doctor. That
That
will be
is
the last.
opioid availability, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So okay. So I was thinking about telling everyone about the opioid availability in the place you are working. So you can just think about it. Have you tried making opioids available? Have you faced any difficulties? If we get some background information, it would be nice to take up the discussion, because when sir asks, we may not be able to put up your questions at that time. So if we can come up with those points earlier or send it to us via email. I'll send a few questions so that you can just fill it up and send back to us. Whether opioids are available, have you tried? Have you faced any difficulties in bringing opioids? What kind of hand holding would you need to make it available? So things like that, so that we can make the discussion more effective next week. So thank you everyone for joining in. See you next week. Give in your feedback before you leave. Thank you so much. Thank you, Raju.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all. We will see you next week. I wish everyone could join next week. That would be our last session. So I request all to join next session. Thank you.
Thank you,
And bye.
Chief. Yeah. Thank you.
വേറെ സെഷൻസ് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നോ? മൺഡേ ഉണ്ടോ സെഷൻസ്, അതോ മൺഡേ ഹോം കെയർ എല്ലാം പോകുന്നുണ്ടോ? നാളെ തീരുമാനിക്കാം.